Good to be with you. I don't know if you can hear me there. I'm not as tall as Will, which may come as a surprise to some of you. Political correctness, really interested to hear what Will had to say, is one of the biggest barriers to liberty and to our movement. Will spoke about how do you get a Marxist to turn into a libertarian. In order to do that, we have to undermine political correctness. And we have to promote a correct understanding of liberty. And we have to do that because political correctness seeks to censor and predetermine what ideas and words may be allowed in the public square. Now, we take a big risk as a party by not creating a safe space because we know that some people will abuse it. There will be some people who will argue that the only reason that we want to oppose political correctness is so that we can have little pockets of racism or whatever it is that people want to have. Well, guess what? That may be a side effect. It is a side effect of freedom, but it is not the reason. It may be, because of political correctness, that few have heard of libertarianism. And the reason for that is because with political correctness, there is no room for true liberty. They don't have the language for it. Now, I grew up in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s in Leicester. And some of you may know that that's an industrial town which was historically built on knitwear and hosiery. And over the decades, it received a great deal of immigration from the Commonwealth, bringing workers and entrepreneurs, people who became business owners and employers from across the world. Among my childhood friends, I could count just about every ethnicity you could imagine. I went to school with them, I played around their houses. They were true friends. Last summer, we had a meetup in Birmingham, and as I was sitting there, sort of just standing back from the conversation and enjoying the hubbub of the people who'd turned up, I reflected that what I was experiencing then was very much like my childhood. Birmingham is a very diverse city, not unlike London, and the mix of ethnicities and backgrounds, the congenial interaction, unforced, was just wonderful. And it crossed my mind that under libertarianism, you could have any religion, any other underlying philosophy, or no religion at all, and everyone would get on fine. By all means, go out into the public square and preach whatever it is you believe, but no one would have the right to force. And that really is the key. You'd get to hear all the ideas, you'd get to evaluate and change your mind if you wanted. And Will was an example of that. Sadly, such a view of liberty and human interaction and free exchange has an insidious enemy, and that enemy is political correctness. So, let's see if that works. We all know someone who thinks this. Now, I did say no safe spaces, but it's purely by accident that happens to be a white woman on the screen, all right? I want equality, I do really. But I also want that special treatment. Tragically, the politically correct incarnation of equality and diversity is no such thing. Rather, it is something more like a divisive kind of special treatment. It's been said, political correctness is censorship with a smile on its face. But let me assure you, that smile never reaches the eyes. It's a hand that becomes a fist should you cross it. Many recent examples of those who've tried to challenge PC orthodoxy. It's been a big week in London for Jordan Peterson. All right, and we probably all really enjoyed that half-hour interview on Channel 4. But what is it that resonates with what he says? It is because he speaks the truth. And he is not afraid to speak it. Whatever it is, he believes. And you may have seen one of his other YouTube videos where he talked about speaking your view with as much eloquence as you can. And even if you're losing the argument, you'll get better at it. Because the alternative is to become, to use his words, a miserable worm. You have to present your case. All right, now he described his time when he was under the cosh at the university he worked at as hell for about a year. But he's not in that hell anymore. He pushed back at his university's attempt to curtail free speech. He saw it for what it was. It was a tool of a murderous ideology, of oppression. And he's out of that hell now, and it is his courage to speak out that has catalyzed and motivated many others who had lost their voice. I'm not going to ask for any hands, but how many times have you thought something and you're about to say it and then you stopped yourself? Not because you thought it was the wrong thing, but because you were afraid of what other people would say. What label they would apply to you for having that thought. That is the censorship of political correctness. Now, we're not against equality and diversity in the Libertarian Party. We are against the politically correct version of it because of its tendency to censor our speech and silence our voices. Instead of equality and diversity, we get division, segregation, and partisanship with political ends. All right? Because the real target of all this is to dismantle the heritage of individual freedom. And so to do that, they must challenge our identity and they must silence opinions that can argue back. I don't know if you ever came across this, but 2007, I read a wonderful article by author Philip Pullman. He wrote Northern Lights, Golden Compass, all of those things, and quite a few other things besides. But he wrote an article called Malevolent Voices That Despise Our Freedoms. And in it, he took the voice of the state, and he says, you don't know who you are. This is the state speaking to you. You're mistaken about yourself. We know better than you do what you consist of, what labels apply to you, which facts about you are important and which are worthless. We don't believe you can be trusted to know these things, so we shall know them for you. And you will all be aware of how political correctness applies labels and tries to put you in a box, whether that's by race, whether it's by gender, sexuality, religion, age. And the most important thing political correctness wants you to believe is that the label is important. You might be one or many of those things, but you are also so much more. And that puts you in a subgroup which can view the other subgroups with fear and suspicion. And so rather than the equality and diversity and the togetherness, it actually creates division. Take, for example, Antonia Okafor. Have you ever watched the PragerU videos? This is quite a well-known one. If you've not seen it, go and watch it. All right, she is a young, single black woman who grew up in a poor home without a father, who recently discovered that she's racist, sexist, and a misogynist. How can this possibly be? And she became those things by leaving her allocated group, by finding that she agreed more with Republicans in her country, she's from the US, than the allocated Democrats that her group is supposed to support. The more questions she asked, she says, the less popular she became in her group. That must sound familiar to some of you guys. As you take that path towards liberty, you find that your friends get a bit quiet on Facebook. But the better she felt about herself. So rather than true diversity, all you get is a label, which never asks about your hopes, your dreams, and your ambitions. It never asked Antonia about her talents, her hopes, and her dreams. It only asked about her colour and what neighbourhood she grew up in. And when she began to think for herself, she was then castigated and rejected by her own group. As Tom Woods put it, alleged supporters of diversity are the ones who most insist on uniformity, as long as it's within your box. Paradoxically, in the Libertarian Party, we embrace true equality and diversity by only recognizing one minority. I want to jump forward because I'm going to run out of time. and that is the individual. As a party, we don't gather any information on your sex or gender or age or religion or ethnicity or nationality. We don't have any exclusionary working groups or committees focusing on just one of these arbitrary groups. Everyone is an individual with equal individual worth, each with the same rights and freedoms, all of which freedoms are the same as the person sitting next to you. So yes, we encourage politeness and goodwill. We encourage everyone to get out of their echo chambers, to remove unnecessary walls, to build bridges, but we will not force parties to associate who are unwilling. To do so would be immoral. I hope we all realize that this is the only moral path. This is why I became a libertarian. I hope we realize that true diversity and equality can only be gained by recognizing everyone as an individual. That if we infringe the rights of one, we set a precedent to infringe the rights of all. That if we try to use the state to threaten or force someone to be compliant with our preferred behaviors, that we set a precedent that someone else can force us, we strongly denounce this approach. And we seek a moral and equal society brought about through respecting the natural rights of each individual. And that is why political correctness and its brand of equality and diversity has no place in a free society. We want to recognize the true equality and diversity. I hope we realize that to keep our freedoms, we must exercise them. And that means taking a leaf out of Jordan Peterson's book. It means standing up and speaking when that training we've had ever since we were at school, that, oh, you shouldn't say that, or that opinion's not allowed. You have to bridge that gap and say it anyway. Because only if we use them and defend them can we keep them. And it has to be all of us, not some of us. And it has to be all the time, not some of the time. Thank you.